Today we're back with Josh Fitzhugh and his treasured discovery about what is God's big plan for you. All right. So here we're talking treasured discoveries. So Josh, what is this gold? We talk about how as we go into the word, we go mining, right? Bible study, digging in there, and we discover gold. What is some gold you have discovered?
Yeah. I love it when the Lord shows me something more to a familiar passage. You know, there's things I grew up in the church, and have known and heard the Bible a lot, and when you do that, I think there's a danger that I can kind of become too familiar and just and stop hearing what the Lord is saying in that. So I love it when He brings something to me in a fresh way. And one of those places where that has happened for me is in Romans 8. And Romans 8:28 is a favorite verse in when people face difficult times, and rightly so. And we know that to those that love God, all things work together for good, even to those who are called according to His purpose. And then he continues. And I've always appreciated that, and know that okay, that the Lord is at work. The Lord is going to work even in these circumstances that are whether things we're rejoicing about or things we're sorrowing over, that He is going to work to for the good of those who love Him. He's going to accomplish good through this somehow, and that's a great truth in itself. But then what one of those days where it just hit me across the head, that's the way it has to work for me sometimes, is say, well, what is the specific good? You know, is it just nebulous? It could be a lot of things. And I mean, the Lord does work a lot of different kinds of good out. But what Paul is saying in that passage is very much whom He foreknew, He also foreordained to be conformed to the image of His Son. That is the good He's working towards. That is He's going to work out everything in my life to shape me, to make me become like His Son. And the reason He's doing that is because He couldn't do anything better. There's no one that would be better to be like. There's no greater gift He could give. You know, He could say, well, I'm going to work this out so that you have a comfortable existence, or I'm going to work this out so that all your dreams are fulfilled, or whatever. You know, that, okay, those would be nice things. I'm sure I'd enjoy that. But if those things happened and I was only like Josh at the end of it, that'd be sad. You know, but what He's doing is to say, my big idea for you is that I am going to make you like my Son. You know, I remember hearing, actually, I was with your dad in Port Colborne once, and R.E. Harlow spoke at that morning, on a Sunday morning. And I remember chatting with your dad about it afterwards. But I never forget, R.E. Harlow said, he said, it's as if the Father looks at His Son and says, I wish I had a million more like him. And then He sets out to accomplish that. You know, it was just such a simple way of putting it, but I think that's so brilliant, that the Father says there's nothing better that I could do for anybody than to make them like my Son. And that is what He's going to do. So that's the idea. That's the gold that I found there, that there's this very specific thing that Paul is saying in all that. He's going to work all this together for the good of conforming me to the image of His Son. That's what He's at. That's what life's about.
Now, you mentioned that very often this passage is used for times of hardship. Mm-hmm. How then does this, what you've just been talking about, change this from merely being that inspirational text in the hardship to this transforming truth?
I think, you know, in a hard time, you know, if you've lost someone, or someone has hurt you, or you've had a disappointment of some kind, that the whispers in your ear that come in are either about how, there's how this is hopeless. There is no point to this. This is meaningless. And so when we hear this verse in those times and say, okay, actually God has a purpose, it shuts up those voices, and say, this isn't about this, even more than this just being the last chance you ever get at something good. This thing itself, this loss, this bereavement, this disappointment, even this sin that was committed against you, and even a sin that I have committed, God can, in his mercy, take those things and in ways that maybe we can only probably see much later, and say, I'm going to change you. Maybe if it's, say, for instance, if it's a sin that I've committed, to say, I'm going to use that to show you how ugly sin is. I'm going to take that thing that you did, and that you now, I'm going to make you see that is the reality of sin. Maybe you've flirted with some kind of sin before. Maybe you've seen, you wanted to kind of go for that. Now you see the destruction that is at the end of that road. Now you see it, and now you actually no longer want it. So he changes my desire. He changes my hunger for that, and actually makes me sick when I think of that thing. That's one instance, I think, where he transforms it. Or to say, with a bereavement, if to lose somebody, and sometimes there's nothing harder than that, to actually say, I'm going to raise your eyes up above the real and good things that are going on, and say, this isn't all there is. Because so often, I think, for me, and just in the busyness of life, and even with all that I do believe about the Lord and about what he's revealed, it's just, the vision is about here, and just looking and saying, this is what's going on. And sometimes when he takes that, he can, when that bereavement or that hard thing comes, he comes in and he says, you've got to see a bit beyond that. And as much as that hurt, I am able to use this to make you see that this was not ultimate. This was not the biggest thing. It was important, and it was good, and I think in a sense, he weeps with us over true loss. But he says it wasn't the ultimate. It was for something else. And so, there's a sense in which it can keep us from idolizing things, making ultimate things out of temporary things. So those are a couple of examples, I think, of how he has done that for me.
Yeah. And you were talking about the end goal that will, it's all to an end purpose, and part of that in the midst of a hardship, that's a faith, a trusting him. And I like how just a few verses down, it says, what is it based on? He who spared not his own son.
That's right.
But delivered him up for us all. How shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Yeah. So it's like, what is this based on? How can I trust that he will accomplish this in all these hardships to make me like his son? Oh, well, it's in sacrificing his own son. It's in that hardship. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with that too, you think even in that, to be conformed to the image of the Son, because when he was on the cross, you have that heartrending cry of, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that the reality of the and brutality of what he was facing then eventually leads on to when he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And through that darkness and that deep valley comes eventually the voice of trust and the voice of, I'm in your hands. And so he actually wants us to bring us to that place as well, where even in those hard things, it's easier to say than it is to go through. But that's exactly, he eventually will bring us to that point.
Yeah, and that's a great connection. Looking at it in Christ, our ultimate example, right? Looking to him, the author and finisher of our faith, shows us how then we ought to live. Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So now, how do you? I like to say, polish the gold, right? So this is a great truth. This is something we need to keep in the forefront of our brain, right? But then, as you said, the blinders, the vertical blinders start to come on. So how do you keep this kind of alive? What are some of the things you do?
That's a good question. I think for me, one of the key things I think is weekly to celebrate the Lord's Supper. Like, I think that has the value of that. And yes, we're giving to him in that time, but we never give to him, but he gives us way more back. And just, to go back at week by week and say, okay, he didn't spare his son. And to see whatever facet, whatever thing the Spirit of God brings out in that time, there's always a sense in which it's just pushing me back to see the reality that he's at work, and he's saying, okay, now here's the week ahead, now go off into it, and I'll be with you, but and in a sense, to say we'll meet up again next Sunday, but not just then, obviously, but
Right.
So I think that's one of the practical things, I think, is why one of the reasons why it works so well, to have that weekly time at the Lord's Supper. I think too, just for me, one of the important things is trying to be disciplined to just stop and listen. So when I think it's usually when a big thing comes, or it doesn't have to be a massive thing, a loss of a loved one, but a disappointment or a difficulty, is just to stop even for 10 minutes and stop trying to figure out how to fix it, how to make it better, how to do the next thing that I need to do, which we have to do in so many cases. But just to stop and say, just look to the Lord and say, okay, what do you want to do with this? So faith says, your word says you're going to do good out of everything. Anything and everything that happens, you're going to work it for that specific good of making me like your son. So do you want to tell me now, or do you want to tell me later, Lord, how you're going to do this? Because I'm open to listen. But so I think for me, and just maybe who I am as a person, faith very much means stopping for a little bit and listening, and just trying to reorientate myself to him and his word. And very often it is, when I just do the stopping and listening, it's this verse and others like it, that this passage that he brings my mind and my heart back to.
Yeah, and it's like an intentional anchoring, right? In the storminess of life. It's just, hang on a second, let me make sure I've dropped the anchor. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
right. And just
that's good.
Listening so he can bring back what he needs to, because it's not, it's different places sometimes, and it's not always the I don't know the number of times I've heard people say, okay, this is not how you should do Bible study, but there was this one time when I opened my Bible and it just fell open to the right way. You hear that because nobody wants to say that's a good way, and it's not as a method. But so often I think the Lord does bring, whether it's through a Bible that's just opened, or somebody saying the right thing at the right time, where he brings to mind in different ways his word, and that's the fact that the idea of the living word of God, that he spoke it, and when he spoke it, but he's still speaking it today in a living way, and he wants it to hit home in a living way to us now.
Yeah.
So that happened with me recently, even just through discouraging kinds of things. and I just sat down, and I just, like, I didn't, there's so many things to do. I said, no, I'm just going to stop. And I actually did the open, and it opened at Isaiah 40, and just saw things there I hadn't seen before. A great thing about renewing strength and so on. But one of the things that stuck out to me was just that he is the shepherd, and he will shepherd his people. I think for me, I'm an elder in our local church, and there were some things that wrestling through as a church, and it just, okay, ultimately he's responsible. He's the shepherd. You're the underling, and get in line. So he brought that home, but I think that what he asks us to do, I mean, he'll do the comforting, he'll do the work, but first he says, you choose to stop and listen, or you choose not to stop and listen.
Yeah.
So I'll do the talking. You've got to choose to listen here.
Right. Yeah. As my dad says, God doesn't have a communication problem. The issue is, am I listening? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, good. Yeah, very valuable. And again, it's one of those verses a lot of times people will go to. It's one of the more well-known verses, but like you, a lot of times it's so common, and again, it probably decreasingly so, as we were talking about before. But we need to be careful of it becoming common. We don't want to.
Yeah. So what good is it? What is the good that he's working towards? I think sometimes to ask that, and if we say anything else ultimately other than to conform us to the image of his son, then we're settling for something less.
Yeah,
he gives us lots of other good things too.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We don't want to settle for anything less. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't.